So it's our second season of this international workshop on environment, sustainability, and education. And it's a joint project that of the Center for Sustainable Futures and the Israel Institute of Education for Sustainability, Kibbutzim College of Education, and Teacher College, Columbia University. And we are very happy to see every time people that are joining us, people that are coming back, and the new people. And it is, we started this almost 2 years ago, and we are surprised every time that people are interested and are coming and take part in the discussion, and it's very, very interesting for us, and I think for all the participants. It's our 6th meeting this year, this second season, and I did this last time, but I wanted to share the first season. This is the program we had the first season, and we had very diverse topics and ideas that we are bringing to this international workshop. And it's really nice to see the diversity in research approaches, diversity places around the world, and it's really help us to see what is going on worldwide, and not just in a conference, but something that is ongoing, and we can continue the discussion. So the second season, we had also diverse things, and I'm very happy to see Bright Flame here that took part in this workshop, and Neta Bar Yosef that had a talk last time, and today's talk is Lur Klotzer, but she will bring really something different from what we had until today, and we will talk about it in a minute. And I just want to mention our next session will be in April 6th, so it's very not so far away, and it will be with Matthew Arp about Earth Day, and it also supposed to be very, very interesting. So if you are interested in sharing your work at the workshop, so feel free to contact us, to contact Oren, or to contact me, and we will be very happy to include you in our session. So today's session is discussing students' ecosophies thanks to science fiction in higher education. And I must say that I met Lur in other projects that we're doing. We're writing now a proposal to the Horizon, and I've heard about your work, Lur, and I thought to myself that you have to come to our workshop, because it is really fit to the diversity that we are trying to bring, and to the, we didn't hear yet, not about science fiction, and not about ecosophies. So I think it's really fit our workshop. And the way we are going to do that, we will start with a presentation, short presentation. Then we have a question and answers session, and then we will break out to rooms, and we will have a discussion according to Lur's questions, and we'll come back to discuss together and to share our ideas from the breakout rooms. So, Lur, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daphna, and Oren for the invitation today. I'm happy to share this work with you and to get your feedbacks. I will, you can use the next slide, please, Daphna.
Yeah, it's not. Okay, sorry.
So today I will focus on a use of science fiction as a pedagogical tool in higher education. Some years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I began teaching a course at the University of Neuchâtel, which is a course called Environmental Psychology. It's about conservation psychology, and it's for bachelor level students. We accept 20, 25, 30 maximum students in this course every year. And the course is built around 3 topics because it's an introduction to environmental psychology. So I had to select a number of topics, and I selected 3 of them, which are experiencing nature, environmental education, and environmental activism. And for each of these topics, we have 3 pillars in the course. We have, I bring some theoretical knowledge, I bring methodology and empirical data to discuss with the students. And we also have for each topic a course dedicated to science fiction writing. And for the writing of science fiction, we use writing protocols from a group of French science fiction writers called Le Collectif Zanzibar. You can see that on the next slide. Zanzibar was created maybe 10 years ago by a number of prominent science fiction writers in France in a conference because we were fed up with having our future stolen by by famous agencies, state agencies, and big companies. And we wanted to, that's the motto in French, désincarcérer le futur, which is disincarcerating the future, freeing the future for the people, allowing the people to imagine the futures, alternative futures to those that are told in newspapers or in or by big companies or by the army. And you can find some details on the Zanzibar group on this website. Why do I use science fiction in my course? Primarily because I would like to engage the students with their own experience in this course. And more precisely, I would like to discuss their ecosophies. The term ecosophy comes from Naes, and it's a shortening of ecological philosophy. So he says, by an ecosophy, I mean a philosophy of ecological harmony or equilibrium. And here you can see Naes' own ecosophy. Man does not stand at the top of a hierarchy of living beings, but rather fits into the ecosphere as a part that fits into the whole. Then the term was taken again by Guattari. It's the next slide, please, Daphna. Who uses the term les 3 écologies and comments only an ethico-political articulation, which I call ecosophy, between the 3 ecological registers, that of the environment, that of social relations, and that of human subjectivity, would be likely to shed adequate light on these questions. So Guattari is refusing that that ecology is only dealing with an environment, and he suggests that to really tackle the environmental questions, we need to bring together the social, the subjective, human subjectivity, and ecology per se, the environmental ecology together, and that would be ecosophy, the articulation of these 3 registers. And then more recently, a linguist has been using this term, Stibbe, and he's analyzing ecosophy in connection to narratives. And he says, the purpose of revealing, exposing, or shedding light on the stories we live by is to open them up to question and challenge. Are these stories working in the current conditions of the world, or do we need to search for new stories? Whether or not the stories are considered to be working depends on the ethical vision of the analyst. It is on whether the stories are building the kind of world the analyst wants to see. So the ecosophy would be related to the kind of world we want to see, and it would be a kind of way to assess whether the stories we live by are appropriate or not, and need refinement. So in my course, I'm using the concept of ecosophy to help the students build and clarify their own philosophical and ethical framework in relation to environment. Next slide, please. So how do we do that concretely? So I told you for each topic of the course, we have a dedicated part with science fiction writing. So at the very beginning of the course, we have an introduction to science fiction, which is taught with Laurent Klötzer, my husband, and a science fiction writer too. So we have this introduction to science fiction. And then for each topic, we use different protokools. This is Zanzibar's term. And the protokools have been designed specifically for this course or for other context, and they are reinvented in each situation. They need to be adapted to each situation. In this course, this is the first protocol that the students will try, and it's very easy and it's short also. And the question is, it's in two parts. And the first part of the first protocol, which is the only one I will comment on today, is framed that way. Choose a place you know well personally. Describe this place and what people do there 20 years in the future, depicting a future that you do not think is desirable, that you would not like to live in. So the important instructions in this protocol are: choose a place you know well personally. It's not some abstract place, it's some concrete place to which the students have some affective connection. And then project yourself in the future and describes what happens there, who you find there 20 years in the future. And the first condition is undesirable future. And the second part of the protocol, as you can imagine, next slide, please, Daphna, is the same instruction, but we ask the students to project themselves in a desirable future. So we begin with undesirable future because we need to help the students express their fears. And we go to the desirable future in order to see what they are dreaming of. After each part of the protocols, so when we give instructions, then the students have around 10 minutes to write on their own. And then we share in the group with the volunteers. So the ones who want to read what they wrote, they can share their writing in the group. And usually we expect to have 6 or 8 or 10 students who would share their writing. And then we do the second part and we share again. And these sharing moments are very important, of course. Next slide, please. So what I will show you quickly today is the data we analyze from some of these protocols. So the first one, of course, we analyzed only the protocols for which we have an explicit consent to participate to the research by the students, which is in that case, we had 18 protocols in 2020 and 19 protocols in 2021. And of course, 2 times, because we have the undesirable future condition and the desirable future condition. And so far, what we did is a thematic analysis of the corpus, which is inspired by ecological issues. So I asked the following questions. What type of place is chosen? Is there any explicit mention of living nature and elements in the story? Are there specific words to talk about nature? And is the perspective anthropocentric? Next slide, please. So if you look at the place chosen by the students, even if it's a course on environmental psychology, surprisingly, more than 40% of the students choose an urban place. And you can see examples of this urban place: ice rinks, a city, a ski resort, the school, a supermarket where my grandmother goes, etc. And 40%, around 40% choose a place of domesticated nature. So mostly because we live in Switzerland, it's about lakeside or forests or walking paths, that kind of domesticated nature. A number of students choose their family house which is usually in a domesticated nature place, but we wanted to put it slightly apart to show that because it comes frequently. And only a limited number of students choose a place in the wild nature. And while it's difficult to have some wilderness in Switzerland, of course, we are a very small country, but it's usually unspecified which kind of place. It's just a place in the mountain or forest. Here, an example of some narrative with an urban location. You can see the version, the condition undesirable future and the condition desirable future. So the story in the first year, it was not, we didn't say 20 years later, we said in the future. And so here you can see it was 70 years later. Ascona Square, which is a city in Tessin, a part of Switzerland. The square in Ascona is increasingly flooded, and the lake level has risen considerably in general due to frequent flooding. The works of art in the church and in the Municipal Art Museum had to be saved as the floods threatened to submerge the warehouses. As a result, Ascona Square has lost its charm and is covered in mud. In the desirable future version, Ascona Square is very flowery and the plane trees are in very good health. The terraces of the restaurants are still open to enjoy the last autumn sun. There is also the Chestnut Fair. The museum and the church are very busy with works of art by great 20th century painters. Everyone is generally cheerful. The lake is still there, but it's not a problem. Next slide, please. And you can see here, I will let you read them, examples of narratives in domesticated nature. So it's happening at the beach in Yverdon-les-Bains. So I don't know if you could read, but as you might see already, the environmental and the social aspects are always interrelated in these stories, both in the undesirable future and in the desirable future. You can go to the next slide, Daphna, when you're finished with reading. And the last example of narratives in wild nature. Undesirable future, it's a place that lies in the unrecognizable heights of a small village. It's not really a secret anymore because it has become the waste disposal site of the neighboring towns. It is customary to create hills with objects that the inhabitants no longer want. People prefer to put them here so as not to spoil the beautiful cityscape. And the desirable future, on this mountain, there are only a few farms and a few farmers. The grass is so green and the air so pure. This is the same land that my ancestors walked on. There has been no change. Every corner is associated with our childhood memories. I wish this place would not change. Okay, I will come back to and comment this later. So if we continue the analysis from an ecological perspective, the next question I asked was, are non-human living elements present in the narrative? And here you can see the results of our analysis. Interestingly, in the undesirable future, there are known living elements or very, very few. And if they are about dying birds, worms, mutant ants, intensively farmed cattle or artificial bees. So not in really good health and not really friendly animals. or they are dead or missing. So this is a category we had to create in the analysis, because initially we wanted to analyze yes or no, but then we understood that in the undesirable future versions, there are a lot of mentions of animals or vegetables, but which are dead or missing. So we created that. And so you can see it's in the undesirable future, it's an overwhelming, there is overwhelmingly no non-human living elements present in the narrative. Whereas in the desirable futures, you can see that, just before, Daphna, yes, you can see 76% of the people who say that, yes, there are plants and animals in these desirable futures, and these plants are alive, these animals are alive, and they are quite diverse: flowers, trees, daisies, birds, foxes, deers, etc. If we look at the specific words used to talk about nature, it's quite disappointing, honestly, because what is striking here is that even in a course on environmental psychology, even in the desirable future, more than two-thirds of the students do not use any specific term to talk about nature. So our hypothesis that they would use more specific terms to talk about nature in desirable futures compared to undesirable futures is not really true here. And finally, maybe the most interesting finding, according to me, is trying to qualify the perspective in the narratives in being anthropocentric or non-anthropocentric. So here we had to create 4 categories based on this question. The first category is there is no relation. There is no relation between humans and non-human living elements if these elements are non-existent. So in the undesirable futures, you can see that more than 80% of times you have no relation, just because there is nothing alive except humans in these undesirable futures. And for the remaining cases, you have an anthropocentric relation, which means that the nature is considered for its utility to human beings only. It's centered on the needs of human beings. Okay, and then if you look at the desirable futures, you can see that even here, interestingly, the anthropocentric relation is the majority of the cases. So you have some relations with other beings in these desirable futures, but they remain in most of the cases anthropocentric. And when you have something else, you can have a non-anthropocentric relation, so nature for itself, or you can have something like a mixed relation, which I will show you later, and it's quite interesting. It's maybe the most interesting. Okay. Thank you. So now I would like to discuss shortly our findings. First, this protocol was first imagined as a tool to put the future in motion. So, but it became an interesting research tool because as a scientific tool, it allows us to compare 2 texts, 2 desirable and undesirable versions of the same place for the same people. And it allows us to highlight some elements of their relationship with nature. For example, the importance of this relationship, which appears strongly in the desirable futures, but also its still predominantly anthropocentric character. So this exercise becomes a potential tool for collecting data in environmental psychology that could complement other quantitative or qualitative methods. Secondly, if we consider on a theoretical level the work of imagination, we adopt an approach to imagination which is informed by the writings of Vygotsky. And in particular, Vygotsky highlights a realistic theory of imagination, where imagination is based on the past experience of the people. And in this exercise, we can see that the students are using both affects and over sources in the building of the futures, and affect and reflection. And if we look at how this imagination is working, please next slide, Daphna, we can see that first, imagining the future is difficult, and it's different for undesirable futures and desirable future. The undesirable future is based on our fears. Here, it's characterized by a loss of color. We lose the green and we turn to gray, the death of non-humans, trees or animals, the loss of rich and embodied human relationships, the commodification, pollution, and distraction of the places we love, especially those linked to childhood. But the desirable futures are based on our hopes. Some of the projections, however, are very conservative. They promote the continuity to childhood in particular, or a fantasized return to childhood. But another is characterized by harmonious relationships with nature and within human communities. So in these desirable futures, we find organic farming, local consumption, self-sufficiency, ecological and non-market communities, etc. But we have not many cases of unbridled explosion of biodiversity. Nature remains controlled and domesticated in most cases. However, we have some emergence of mixed versions, as I said, with an ideology of cohabitation. Next slide, please, Daphna. So this is an example of emergence of a mixed version. Here, proximal cohabitation in my garden, but it's still triggered by human beings. And the student says, we are in my garden next to the wooden pool built recently. Even then, it was a nice pool surrounded by a terrace with some exotic flowers and plants. Today, in 2049, this place offers a real trip into the jungle. In recent years, the state has followed the lead of other European countries and developed a mass project to limit air and noise pollution and improve the well-being of the inhabitants of the cities and villages. No more cars. Transport in the cities is provided by a system of electric buses, pedestrian zones, etc. The effects of such measures were quickly observed on the local fauna and flora. Nature has 1,000 colors and has developed at full speed. It was like a rebirth. We let it settle in the garden. The pool in the center is shaded by beautiful palm trees, wild ferns, flowers, trees, and more take up residence all around. The dense grass is the perfect place for a nap and gently caresses the toes when you venture out barefoot. So you can see in this mixed vision, but we have nature as an actor, because nature has 1,000 colors and it's a rebirth, and it's acting, it's taking its place. And similarly, at the same time, it's living in harmony with the human beings. Okay, next slide. I will skip this one. Thank you. And yeah, I'm not going to comment that one too, just to keep in the time. And so the final discussion is on the pedagogical uses of this science fiction writing. So in the course, I used this exercise to raise awareness and to discuss the students' ecosophies. But the pedagogical design is strongly connected to our understanding of Vygotsky's cycle of imagination. The cycle of imagination for Vygotsky is the idea that imagination gets crystallized in cultural artifacts, which can then nourish the imagination back. So you have a full cycle where between experience, individual and collective experience, imagination, crystallization of imaginary products in cultural artifacts, which can then nourish the personal and collective experience of the people. And I consider that in this course, we have a small full cycle of imagination, Vygotsky's term, because we begin with the experience of the students, then they produce something which is so the crystallization of this imagination, they share it, and then this sharing can nourish back their own experience, but also the experience of the others. So I think that the key dimension in this full cycle of imagination is the fact that the narratives are read and therefore heard publicly, which places everyone in a position to hear their own narrative and the narratives of others, offering a potential social contact with oneself in Vygotsky's terms. Next slide, please, Daphna. So we can skip that one. Thank you. And in the last version of this design for higher education, I made this protocol slightly evolve because we created two phases. So let's imagine what happens 20 years later. Undesirable future, then desirable future. Each time it gets shared. And then we have a phase where these stories are transferred to peers. So there is an exchange, oral exchange between two students about the vision of the future, of a desirable future only of these students. And then their task is to continue the story of their peer in a desirable direction. So they read the desirable future, they discuss the desirable future of their peer, and then they have to continue this writing 30 years later, so in 50 years, in the desirable direction. And so in this reworked version, we reinforce the moments of exchange and the stories. So therefore, we reinforce this social contact with oneself in Vygotsky's term. Next slide, please. And that's all. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you. Yeah, we have now time for a question. If you have any question to Laura.
I hope so.
I hope so too. Yes, Mark.
I was curious about, do you see students kind of borrowing from maybe science fiction that they are familiar with? Or is it more of a creative experience of something that they truly come up with on their own?
No, we see a lot of influences from science fiction tales or movies, because we hear sometimes it's different in the protocols, but in this protocol, we have something very short. So in 2 times 10 minutes, they don't have time for a creative experience. So what we see here is how they bring together things they already know and they already have in their mind about the future. It's interesting because in another protocol, we have more time to build on, it's a different context, a different story, and they are building on this story. And here we see more creative writing.
Thank you.
I would say it's a question of time. But here it's intentional that we don't leave them a lot of time, because we just want to discuss their ecosophies through this crystallization in science fiction stories.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Hi, yeah, very interesting presentation. So I'm wondering, for the discussion, does the facilitator, like the things you shared with us about nature wasn't really mentioned, or, was mentioned in this context, those kind of differences, does the facilitator mention that as the students after the discussion, or is that at some later point? So in other words, do the students hear the kind of things you're sharing now in terms of analyzing the patterns you find?
What I call sharing is just the fact that we read aloud our stories, and the facilitator are always participating. So we are always writing also and sharing too. It's very horizontal. We try to make it as horizontal as possible. So at this step of sharing, it's just reading our stories and not commenting, just listening. Sometimes people comment, but that's not the goal. It's just to listen and share. But later in the course, at the end of the course, I share with them my analysis of their protocols. Yeah, at the end of the course, and then they can react to that.
Okay, thank you.
Netta, thank you.
Hi, thank you for a fascinating presentation. I was wondering if you would apply the terms dystopic and utopic to the desirable and not desirable futures, because you did not mention these, and these are quite hype terms to use in these contexts. So I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Indeed, it's close to dystopia and utopia, but we chose not to mention these terms because we don't want to make it technical at all. We want to make it very easy for anyone to enter into some kind of science fiction writing, which can be frightening. Each year I have students who tell me, well, I don't know if I will like it, or I don't know if I can do it. So we want to reduce the cost of entry into this exercise as much as possible. And also we are not trying to call for already very present images in their mind of dystopias and utopias, because dystopias and utopias have entered the cultural world of almost anyone. So we don't want to trigger that. We want to bring it back to their own experience.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yes, Bright Flame. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I got to know more about your work than I learned so far. I'm interested about how you've classified the different stories. I'm thinking I would lean more in my classification from what I read so far to put them all in the anthropocentric view, as opposed to some not mentioning like if they didn't mention nature, I would still consider that an anthropocentric view probably. Yeah, I could see using your protocol. Is protocol the translation of the English word protocol, or did you purposely did cool at the
it's
end?
a mot valise. I don't know if you have this term in English. It's a luggage word. You bring together protocol and cool. Protocol.
Okay. Yeah, that's how it translates. You know, that's how it came across. I just was wondering because I don't know the translation of protocol. But yeah, it would be really interesting to do another iteration and see if they can even conceive of a non-anthropocentric view, you know, to move thought.
It's regarding the analysis, I had to explain very shortly, but at the beginning, we had anthropocentric and non-anthropocentric relations. But then I think it's quite different when you have no relation at all, which could be anthropocentric, but no relation at all would be level 0 of connection to nature. And then you have anthropocentric, which is already something. And we can see a big difference between the undesirable future and the desirable future regarding that dimension. It really changes from no relation to anthropocentric relation. But then non-anthropocentric relation, it's really rare in our corpus. And from another project, we know it's extremely difficult to help, to support the emergence of these non-anthropocentric visions. And I found that in this corpus, the mixed what we called the mixed visions are the most interesting, because the non-anthropocentric visions, they are very separative, very conservative and very separative. You know, in ecological terms, in scientific ecology, it would be you conserve nature by separating it. You put the nature here, then humans here. And we know it's not going to work because it's not working, right? The colleagues in conservation biology, they know that this ideology, which was very present in the 70s and 80s, it's not working properly. So we don't want to push the students into that direction either. And I found that mixed visions are more interesting, because in the mixed visions, you have some kind of emergence of cohabitation in the same spaces. Even it's very naive visions from the students most of the time around the pool in my garden or whatever, but something like cohabitation is appearing.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm going to throw a link to my article that might be of interest to folks about living with nature as part of nature. So a non-anthropocentric way to push the envelope a little farther even.
Exactly same idea.
Yeah, no, I know that that's your interest as well.
Great, thank you. Gilad?
Hi, I would like to know a bit about the background of the students and the correlation between their work or what they wrote and the place that they live in. How many of them live in the city? How many of them live in the countryside? And if you found a correlation between that and their stories.
Thank you. The background of the students, they are all students in psychology and education. So they prepare themselves to be either teachers or educators or different things in the field of education and development in formal and informal environments. It's difficult to correlate anything with anything in this study because we have so limited number of protocols. The corpus is very small. It's 37 undesirable future stories and 37 desirable future stories. So we should probably wait to try to have interesting correlations. However, in Switzerland, it's difficult to answer that question because a lot of the students, they have lived either in small cities or in villages. So they have a close relationship to nature. And we have elements from that because at the beginning of the course, I asked them to write something about their own experiences of nature, and we can see that almost all the students have experiences of nature. Of course, they self-selected. It's a self-selection bias because they took a course in environmental psychology. So the next step for me would be to do the same exercise for the research, not for the pedagogy. But regarding the research, if we want to continue with that, we need to do the same exercise with a different public. So I can do that with my students in psychology and education who are not interested in environmental psychology. And then we could probably expand also the exercise with a colleague in France who has students in ecology, but with different backgrounds, more contrasted than in Switzerland.
Great, thank you. We'll have two more questions, Nirjeta.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I was wondering, Lori, from your observations, what were the students' mood in the two scenarios? So after writing about an undesirable future, and then after writing about a desirable future.
I couldn't hear properly part of your question. It was, what were the students?
Moods. So
Moods.
their emotions or attitudes are.
They were quite happy, I think. First, because they could make it, and they were afraid they could not make it in the science fiction writing part. So they found it easy because we made it easy at that point. And I think they were happy. And then they were also, I would say, soulagés. I don't know how to translate that. They were feeling a relief because they could see that their own fears were very shared by the others. So it's not something individual. It's really the same things, the same fears. And it creates more a feeling of relief than a feeling of distress. And I was surprised because in my course, some of the students said at the beginning that they were feeling eco-anxious and that the course helped them not feeling eco-anxious, not feeling this powerful regarding some of the issues. Yeah, it's just a small thing, but yeah, we also have this this issue of having some of the students who are feeling bad because of environmental issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. So last question, because we want to have a little bit of time in the breakout room. So Danny, you are the last for now.
Thank you. That was a really interesting presentation. I was wondering if you noticed in those ecosophies any link between them and economic justice or racial justice, anything that is outside the realm of ecology, or actually it's not outside, but whether they in those stories they link them or not.
Well, that was a surprise for us because it's not really present. So we expected them to be more socially aware, and they are not. At least they are not expressing that in their desirable futures. And we had I had an interesting discussion with them because the last topic of the course is environmental activism. And also regarding environment, they are not really active. They are not really engaged socially. They are not among the fighters for the environment. And so I was surprised for that. And I had a discussion with them, and they told me that they were feeling too vulnerable on these topics to try and engage as activists socially, because from their experience or indirect experience of friends, they know that when you engage socially and act as an activist, it hurts. I mean, you get very bad feedbacks, very strong feedbacks, and it hurts. And they were afraid of that. So that was really maybe the most interesting discussion from my perspective in the course, was on why are they not more socially aware and active? Yeah.
Great, thank you. So there is more question in the chat, but we want to move on, and maybe at the end we will have 1 or 2 minutes to discuss that. So what we're going to do now, we will have 5 rooms, 5 breakout rooms, and Laura suggested for us several questions for the discussion. I put in the chat a link to Google Docs that we have shared docs, but I want to share with you. Laura, do you want to explain your question for the discussion for us? I think so. Okay, great. So we will be very happy to hear from the groups. You know, we have only 10 minutes, so each group has half a minute, no, 1 minute to tell us some thoughts or some interesting things that you have in your discussion. So who was in room number 1 and want to share with us some thoughts? No one?
I think room number 1 was Ella, Elvira, Gilad. Hi, Gilad. Nigel, Tehila, and Janelle. Gilad, would you like to share something? You love the fact that I'm putting you on the spot. You just love
Yeah,
it.
no, I'm just a bit hectic here because all the kids are preparing for Purim, so it's a bit loud in here, and so sorry.
So who else? So be prepared. Yes.
I can
Great. Thank you,
tell a
Taylor.
bit.
Thank you.
We talked in the beginning about using artistic art. I don't remember how they said it. And I told that I use it in class. Wait a second. I said I use it at class in acting, giving the students to do acting about different situations, and then when they act, we see new things. I'm sorry, my boy is driving me crazy here. So we said it gives, using those methods, it gives the students an option to expand their reality and to see different situations that in other methods they wouldn't get there. So that was the first thing we talked. And
I think, Tehila, we will stay with the first because we want to hear the other rooms. Thank you. Thank you. So who want to share from the second room? Room number 2, Darren. Oh,
yeah, I'll share. I took some notes. So we had a really fascinating conversation, but I'll just share a few highlights from the conversation. One thing was that we were just kind of interested how limited the imagination is that when we're really asked to dream, how often we limit ourselves from the onset. And one of the elements we talked about was this neoliberalist ideology that appeared where it's my future, how I see myself in this future, not really talking about the we. And so this was the crux of our conversation of what does collective writing look like? How do we collectively create a future rather than the future that I want for myself? So just process-wise, and we even talked about what would this activity look like if we continually visited future creation, if it wasn't just one time, if it was multiple times throughout a course or multiple times throughout a study. Yeah, and then we also talked about different kinds of collective future creation, if it's through art, through drawing, or through writing. Yeah, so these are kind of the main points that we talked about in our conversation.
Great, thank you, Darren. Room number 3. Volunteer for room number 3. Yes, Jeremy. Thank you.
Oh, well, we're 3. I thought we were 4.
You were 4. Okay, 4 is also good. Yeah,
well, yeah, we were a big fan of using creative sources. We saw a lot of gains in our students in various ways, but we actually mostly use the session just to kind of talk about different things we do in class, different resources we use, different exercises we do in that class. So yeah, I guess you could see a lot of that chat, because is there a way to put the breakout only chat? But so yeah.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. So room number 3 or room number 5?
I jotted some things down for room number 3. I think many of us who were there used some form of art and imagination in their teaching, from though most people were based in current time, not projecting out future imaginatives. We have using cognitive maps for teaching ecology and science, cultural legend combined with science as a pedagogy. The thought that imagination helps students connect better to the content. I jotted down a bunch of things, but trying to pick out Oh, thank you, Stephanie, for adding that, since there wasn't time for you to speak in the breakout, which I will read. Using projects that can develop over time as opposed to being with a deadline, this enables students to build on their work with developing vocabulary and not to limit projects to written form, but dramatic works and visual forms or props.
Great, great. So room number 5, thank you, Bright Flame. Volunteer for room number 5?
I can
Sure.
say,
Yes, great.
just one thing. We discussed how it can be uncomfortable for the teacher to raise emotions in the classroom.
Great.
And
Yes, this is good.
how to deal with that if we tackle environmental issues, for example.
Yeah, this is a great thing. So I think we need to conclude. But Laura, if you have something that you want to, to sum up or to add, or if there was a question in the chat before, if you want to. I will try to find this question.
Yeah, no, just to thank you all for the very interesting comments. It helps me, as I said, reflect on what I'm doing, because first of course, I had an idea of what I was trying to achieve by using science fiction in my classroom. But I think thanks to the discussion, it helps me explicit some aspects. And for example, it made explicit for me the fact that the reason why I bring imagination into the classroom, which is quite unusual and makes the students surprised, is because I want to bring their personal experience into the classroom. And it's difficult at the university to bring the personal experience of the students into the classroom and make it comfortable for them, because usually it's not the place where you discuss your own experience. And that was one of my goals in this course. But I didn't want to do it directly. So for me, it's an indirect way to bring their experience into the classroom through imagination and especially science fiction. And so thank you all. And just to ask you to not use, please, the PowerPoint, because it's not yet published. Nothing of that is published. It's very recent work. So just for you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura. And thank you all for joining us today. And I'd love to give you 2 minutes for relief, for break, or something. So thank you, and see you again in April 6th. We will sure it will be interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Toda raba.
Thank you, everybody.
Stay well, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Very much.
Long live the ESC Chevet. Did I say that right, Oren? Chevet?
Chevet, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Now I learn a new word in English. Yeah.
Plan.
Thank you and bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Doras. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Laura. That was really interesting.
Thank you.